It's another uneventful day at sea, and you're lounging against the rail of your ship's deck, resting before you must return to the tiresome work on board. Suddenly, something knocks the boat and you lose your balance, causing you to fall overboard and into the water. You plunge into the icy cold, briny sea. Something catches your eye. A dark, writhing mass, impossibly large, directly below you. You try to swim upwards, but something snakes around your leg, squeezing with titanic strength until your bones are at the point of breaking. Then it drags you down into the murky abyss, towards its gaping maw, lined with hundreds of jagged teeth. Hello again, I'm Conan of Coco's Homebrew, and this is the third episode of From Mythos to Monsters, where we look at how different mythological beasts have been reinterpreted in the modern fantasy genre. As always, you can support me through my Patreon, where I make D&D content. The more support I get over there, the more I can do with this podcast in the future. Now, let's get into it, because I'm very excited about today's monster. See, I'm a huge fan of nautical history, and I love learning about old ships and naval battles. I'm also only slightly embarrassed to admit that I listen to sea shanties in my spare time, although thankfully not enough to appear on my Spotify Wrapped. I'm also fascinated by the concept of the sea monster, and today's subject, the Kraken, is without a doubt the most famous and fearsome example of that. The modern idea of the Kraken is associated with a giant octopus or squid, but you might be surprised to learn that this wasn't always necessarily the case. Descriptions and depictions of sea monsters have been around since the medieval ages, although if you consider the Leviathan of biblical legend to be a sea monster, you can trace the idea back even further. Sometimes known as the primordial chaos, the Leviathan is a sea serpent from Jewish mythology spoken of in the Hebrew Bible, although the concept originally seems to have come from pre-biblical Mesopotamia, the modern-day Near East that encompasses countries like Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt. It was said to be a ferocious and powerful beast with many heads who dwelt in the depths of the ocean. Interestingly, the way the Leviathan is described makes it seem as if it was, or maybe even is, a real creature, although most scholars believe it's actually just a metaphor, either for the powerful enemies of the Hebrew people, or for Satan, or more generally just the concept of chaos or the power of God. Or maybe the real Leviathan was just the friends we made along the way. The Leviathan may have also inspired stories from other mythologies, like the Vritra of Hinduism, the humanoid serpent who opposed the gods by blocking important rivers, or Jormungandr of Norse mythology, the serpent or worm who was tossed into the ocean and became so large he eventually encompassed the entire world. With all of these various ideas of the sea monster appearing in myths and religious legends from across the world, it makes sense that the concept kept resurfacing throughout history. Later sea monsters were described as taking a large variety of forms, which indicates that they were probably just real animals like whales, sharks, or narwhals, although they still no doubt laid the foundations for the myth of the Kraken. Like the previously mentioned world serpent, Jormungandr, sea monsters in general have deep roots in Scandinavian culture. One of the first known sea monsters was the Hafgufa, which, according to 13th century Norwegian manuscripts, was said to roam the Greenland Sea. The Hafgufa was perhaps made most famous by its inclusion in the Prose Edda, which is considered to be one of the most valuable sources we have regarding the mythology of Old Norse culture. This definitely won't be the last time you hear about it in this podcast. Well, later translations of the Prose Edda seemed conflicted about what to translate the word Hafgufa as. While some called it a mermaid, others refer to it as a kraken. Yet while the word kraken has roots to Old Norse, it didn't start being used in reference to sea monsters until the 17th century. In fact, the kraken itself didn't become synonymous with having the appearance of a cephalopod the genus of animals that includes squids and octopi, until the 18th century, when a Danish bishop named Pontoppidan wrote of an octopus of such incredible size that it was capable of pulling ships beneath the ocean. Also, side note, Pontoppidan, fantastic name. But where did all of these legends come from? Why, over the course of centuries, did scholars keep referencing the idea of a colossal, tentacled sea creature? Well, while I'd like to pretend there are maybe things in the ocean beyond our comprehension, this guy was almost certainly just a colossal squid. Yeah, with modern understandings of the world's ocean, this is definitely one of the easiest myths to unravel. But to give credit to the scholars of antiquity, the colossal squid wasn't even confirmed to be a real animal until the 20th century, and we didn't even have a specimen of the creature until the early 2000s. In fact, the first live video of one was only recorded last year in 2025. So it kind of makes perfect sense why the idea of the Kraken took on a life of its own, considering the creature that inspired it is so incredibly rare that even modern civilization is having a hard time proving it's real. But despite probably having real-world beginnings, over time the myth of the Kraken became increasingly less grounded in reality. It was no doubt popularised by the very early works of nautical fiction, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Moby Dick. Even H.P. Lovecraft was thought to draw heavily on the legend while designing his most famous monster, Cthulhu. Now in the modern day, the myth of the Kraken is still as alive as ever, with franchises like A Song of Ice and Fire and Pirates of the Caribbean keeping it culturally relevant. It's also become a staple of Dungeons and Dragons, first appearing in the game in 1983. While I've accused Gary Gygax of running away with legends in the past, I can't say that about his interpretation of the Kraken. In D&D's first edition, it literally was just a giant angry squid. Well, in appearance at least. See, the Kraken also had a few traits that ordinary squids don't. It had a tough armoured shell, the ability to cast certain magical spells, and, vast legions of slaves. Yikes. Yet, at the beginning of D&D's lifespan, while the Kraken was fearsome, it wasn't nearly as powerful as what it would eventually become. By the time of the game's 5th edition in 2014, both its appearance and abilities had undergone massive changes. The Kraken was now a tyrant, asserting dominance over entire oceans, whose body incorporated the traits of many different aquatic animals, including cephalopods, fish, and crustaceans. While I think the Kraken's official 2014 design is ugly as sin, I actually really like the concept behind it. See, early accounts of sea monsters often described them as not just resembling a singular animal, but as an abomination, combining the traits of different creatures. By the time of the 2025 revision of the Monster Manual, however, the Kraken's official design had returned to being a giant pissed off squid. At least Gygax can stop turning in his grave now, I guess. In 5th edition, the Kraken is one of the strongest creatures in the entire Monster Manual, capable of summoning lightning storms, devouring entire parties of adventurers, and even having psychic powers, allowing it to telepathically communicate and dominate the minds of animals around its lair. Yet I do think there's something to be said for the first edition's more simple and grounded idea of the Kraken, which, while still inherently supernatural, was ultimately just a sea monster as opposed to a godlike titan. So, as a storyteller, how would I depict the Kraken in my own legends? Well, while I like the idea of it being some intelligent eldritch overlord of the ocean, I think that idea delves way too much into the tropes of Lovecraft, which ultimately weren't what invented the Kraken, nor made it a popular myth. Instead, while the Kraken should still be powerful enough to do things like drag down ships, at its core it should remain a force of nature rather than something otherworldly. An uncomfortable reminder of just how little we know about the world's oceans and what could be lurking in their depths. that's going to be a wrap for the Kraken, but I hope you enjoyed learning about it. I'm certainly a huge fan of it, and it makes me wish modern fantasy would incorporate more creatures from the superstitions of sailors. Let me know what you think in my comments, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or follow my Spotify page if you haven't already. While you're at it, you can also join my Discord and Patreon for free.